Today, I'm joined by someone I've known for many years and who offered me helpful mentorship early on in my business journey, Tampa City Council member Bill Carlson. Bill represents South Tampa, and he's also the president of Tucker Hall, a respected strategic communications firm here in Florida. He brings a unique perspective because he's worked in both business and government, and today we're going to be talking about the similarities and differences between the two and what each can learn from the other. Bill, welcome to the podcast. It's such an honor to have you and such a joy. I consider you a friend.
No, thank you. I'm excited to catch up with you and see you on the show. Look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely. I mentioned that you were my mentor very early on in my, brand envy days. I reached out to you because I was like, oh, okay, he's the president of Tucker Hall. And, Tucker Hall is an incredible PR firm that's been here for how many years?
Like 35?
Yeah, 35 years. So
We're
I'm
already
like,
we're in our third generation of leadership now already.
yeah. Yeah. And I saw that and I was like, you know what? I bet I can pick his brain. And there's one thing that I've learned about successful people, and it's that they're always willing to help other people rise up. So I reached out to you out of the blue. I kind of cold called on you and I was like, Bill, I would love to pick your brain. I have this small company. Can we get together and can you let me pick your brain? And you have always been very generous with your time and providing me with advice and guidance and recommending books to read. And then over the years, I've enjoyed our friendship. And then you started getting into government. So you have this unique perspective where you've really had your feet in both sides. And they have a lot of differences and similarities. So can you share with us a little bit about how you've been able to apply all of your business acumen into the government sector? And even what made you transition into the government sector?
Sure. First, I think it's important to pay it forward. As you talked about, over the years, I've had a lot of mentors. I would not be wherever I am without people who helped lift me up and show me the path. And early in my career, I had competitors who stepped up and helped me. Deanne Roberts was one of them. She had Roberts Communication, which is now Chapel Roberts, but she had several advertising agencies and PR firms that she helped mentor. And what we found is that made the community so much better because we could collaborate on community projects. And then it also just helped us if we competed with each other, we did it in a friendly way. And unfortunately, the world is not always like that. What I find is the people that think of the world as a zero-sum game, they usually fail in the end. The only way you really succeed is by helping other people. And it pays back over time in multiple ways. At the very least, you feel good about it. The government and business are really different. Business people think that government should be run like a business. Government people think that government is really different. I think there are lessons that can be learned from both. One of the things about business is that especially entrepreneurs, the businesses are always bootstrapped. So you never have enough capital. You never have enough revenues. You're always risk taking. In government, you're using the public trust. You have fees and taxes that you are the custodian of to spend to support the public. And I find that that's a big responsibility. We have to be really careful about how we use money. Not everybody in government thinks that way. Some folks think that we can spend everything we get. One of the things I did in 2019 when I got elected was to try to replenish the general fund reserve. The previous administration had drained it down during the boom times. Usually, think about your own business, your personal life. You save money in the good times and then you spend the savings in the bad times. The city of Tampa had done the opposite. 2 mayors ago, they saved a bunch of money in the reserve fund, the rainy day fund. And the last administration during the boom times spent it. So I pushed to save money. It was good that we did that because then we went through COVID and a whole bunch of other things. And as a result of saving money, our bond ratings have gone up. And so what that does is it gives Tampa great recognition nationally, internationally, and it helps our interest rates go down. Those are a couple examples.
Yeah, when I think of, and I'm not the most I'm kind of ashamed to admit this, but I do it for my own mental health. When I sit down and watch too much news, I start to feel really kind of overwhelmed, right? So I tritate how much news I get into. But overall, in general, coming up in the world, when I think of government and countries, I'm always very confused because they always seem to be in debt. Like the US is in debt. I know Puerto Rico's in debt. Like, so when I think of running a business, I think of exactly like for me, the way I run my company, we've got our rainy day fund. I'm always making sure that we're profitable and I'm, steering the sailboat, right? When I think of government, it's like it's weird. I have in my mind, I'm like, it either has like a unbelievable amount of money that it's just doling out and it's in debt. And so to me, I've never been able to really reconcile those two. Do you have any perspective on that?
The other thing is, if you think about in your business, one way you can make more money or to get more revenues is you can raise prices. But then the market will maybe cause the public to choose a different competitor if your prices are too high. In the government, people have no choice. The only time they can make a change is at the elections. And some people in government think that the solution is to keep raising taxes or fees. And I happen to not agree with that. I think that government should be more efficient about how it uses its money. Debt, if you think about in the private sector, even if you're a well-funded company, many times companies will use debt because depending on the interest rates, they can leverage it and make more money by utilizing the debt. So if you're paying 6% interest or whatever it is, 10%
Hmm.
interest, and then you can make 20% return, then you can leverage debt to make more money than you're paying in interest. And so there's a measure there to look at like debt equity ratios and other measures to use to see if you have too much debt. If you're a public company, the markets, if you think about the stock markets, they're an exchange of money and capital, but they're really an exchange of consistently presented information. And
Right.
so ideally, if they're following the law and the rules, you can look at information and see which companies are making profit, which companies have too much debt. You can compare investments to investments. In government, unfortunately, there's no common template. And governments can present information the way they want in a way that makes them look good. I think there's a tipping point on debt. 2-3 years ago, I asked the city of Tampa to tell us the total debt and what percentage of our capacity of debt we had used. And the city staff presented a number. A year later, they presented a different number, and that number was more than double what the original number was.
Wow.
And I think that's a transparency issue. Their response is that I didn't ask the question the way that would present the entire information. But the question I asked was, what's the entire debt? What's the total debt? And they decided to choose to answer it one way. The problem with debt is that you pay interest. And in today's interest rates, if you buy something for $50 million, you're going to pay somewhere between 40 and 50 million in interest over 30 years. And that's a real cost to taxpayers. If you could do what we call pay-go and pay out of current revenues, you save all that money, and that gives you more money to invest in things like fixing potholes.
You mentioned like you requesting a report and then them, kind of presenting something and then saying, well, you didn't ask it the right way. I also, when I look at government, also, it always seems so adversarial. There's always this kind of like people pitting against each other with the political parties, and it just gets so messy. We know there's a level of corporate drama and politics, right, inside of an organization, but I think that the government just really takes it at a whole new level.
Yeah, the folks that are in Congress say that when the U.S. was founded, it would take several days to take horses away from the Capitol. And so people would stay over the weekends and they would get to know each other. They knew each other personally. Now they can take a plane and leave and they don't have to spend time with each other. And that really makes a difference. In Florida, there are sunshine laws that prohibit local governments. It doesn't prohibit the legislature, but it prohibits the local government officials from talking to each other. We can say hello, but we can't talk about substantive issues. And so
Wow.
all the debates and discussions we have to do in a public forum. And sometimes people take that as a disagreement, but really we're not allowed to talk about it outside if we follow law. And then sometimes there are elected officials who I think have the wrong motivations. They either want to have a personal agenda or they are trying to help their buddies get a contract or whatever. And when you push back against that, sometimes they get really nasty. And that looks to the public like a fight also. But I would rather be accused of having a fight with someone than allow them to push some crony contract on taxpayers.
Yeah. That's wild. I did not know. And it's funny because again, we're, in my mind, we're trying to compare and contrast like, running a regular business, right? Corporate culture and what you're explaining to me. So when I think of business in general, both internally and externally with our customers, relationships is number one. Building relationships. That's why we go to lunch and why we, get to know and ask about each other's kids and bond over things. And right, like that's how business is done. But you're telling me that on the government side, there's laws that prohibit people from forming deeper relationships and, like you said, getting to know each other. I think that's
Well, we
wild.
can see each other at events, we talk to each other, but if we're seen in public talking to each other, or worse in private, people will assume that we're talking about government business. And so we're very careful. We never have lunches with each other without witnesses to prove that we're not
Wow.
talking about government issues. And so we can talk about nice things, but if you feel strongly about an issue, you might really like the person, but then you'll disagree with them on an issue. And that's okay. That's the idea of democracy.
Yeah.
That democracy is working when people have disagreements, because then you're hearing different viewpoints.
Yes, I agree. And that's important. Coming from on my mom's side of the family, it's all Cubans. My grandmother came from Cuba when Fidel took over. And I grew up hearing stories of how you didn't have free speech and you couldn't share your opinions and you would get arrested just for speaking out against government. And I think that that's something that for me, I really value being able to have, like you said, disagreements, freedom of speech, and being able to resolve issues, and I think that's where government gets sticky, the resolving of issues, because there's all of these forces. I think in a company, there's that CEO, that president, that leader, and kind of the buck stops with that person, right? Like whatever they say is what goes. But in government, there seems to be so many forces on a subject. It makes it very sticky and complicated to work through those issues.
Think about in companies, if a CEO of a public company makes a decision to invest, let's say $100 million, they'll have to get their board's approval.
Mm-hmm.
But if they don't disclose that they have a personal relationship with the company that's getting the contract, they can go to jail. The U.S. government can step in, SEC can sue them, other things. In government, that happens all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm someone who doesn't believe that that should be allowed. I think that you should not have personal relationships or family relationships with people who are getting contracts. And the purpose of getting a contract should not be because you want to give your friends money. It should be that it's in the best interest of the public. And if you believe that the money you're spending is in the best interest of the public, then you should be okay having a public debate about it. And
Yeah.
you should be okay having a friendly debate about it.
Yeah.
But when somebody's trying to protect a dirty deal, they get nasty about it
Yeah.
and they point fingers and they blame people for all kinds of things because they want to divert away from the real issue, which is that you're wasting the public's money.
Right. 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 But I mean, and what you're describing to me is such a basic ethical. It's just ethics 101. And I don't know, maybe I watch too much true crime. But I'm like wondering, are these people being threatened that they need to get this thing approved? Otherwise, their whole family's going to get killed or something like that. I know that that's definitely the true crime binger in me. It's, to me, what you just described is just ethics 101. But when I went to USF, I remember when I first stepped out into the real world, you look at academia, right? And you learn about ethics and you learn about the way things are supposed to be. And being, young in your early 20s, I stepped out and I started seeing what the real world was really like. And I describe the real world as the wild, wild west, right? Anything goes. Absolutely anything goes. And I remember crying in my car, wanting to return to USF. I wanted to get hired at USF and stay in the academia bubble because it was so nice and neat and controlled. And then the real world was, I don't want to say dirty deals, but it was definitely quick and dirty. And it was not like the proper ethical, correct things that you learn in school and think that that's how things go. And,
There's also politics at USF. You just didn't get involved in them.
I guess
Well,
not.
one thing I want to mention, you mentioned countries where free speech is not allowed.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally believe strongly in the Bill of Rights and free speech, freedom of the press, and my colleagues do as well. And so at City Council, many government agencies will limit the amount of public comment at the beginning of a meeting, and they'll limit it by time, and they'll also limit it in the topics that you can discuss. And typically, you limit it to say you can only talk about the topics of that day. And the state law allows us to not have any public comment at all. But what we do at City Council is that we allow for 3 minutes, you can say pretty much whatever you want. As long as it's not incredibly offensive, you can say whatever you want. And so we have people talk about all kinds of issues that have nothing to do with City Council. And sometimes we sit for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And some people watching in the public think that that's a waste of time. But I think it's important to protect that place, because we're one of the few places in the whole region that where people can get up and state what they believe, even though we might disagree with them. As Americans, we have the right to make those statements.
Totally. And in corporations, it's encouraged for leadership to have an ear on the ground level to hear what, the people that are at the front lines working with customers and also listening to customers as well. That's something that is, to me, normal, of course. Like if you guys don't have the opportunity to kind of hear what's on their mind or what's bothering them, then how and not just complaints, but just, whatever's on their mind, then how would you know how to best represent them? Because you are a public servant. You are there to serve them. And even in a corporation, I think to some degree, leaders, presidents, CEOs at C-suite, executive leaders are there also to serve, in a way, the employees and serve the customers as well.
One thing that's different about most government agencies from companies is what you just talked about. I think most elected officials understand that they have a duty to be good custodians of the tax money and the taxpayer interest. But most government agencies are not designed to be customer friendly. And the incentives inside most government agencies are not tied to customer incentives. For example, at Ritz-Carlton years ago, they created a rule that said any staff member can spend up to $1,000 to make a customer happy. I'm not saying that government should do that, but if you incentivize and focus your internal measures on customer satisfaction, you would radically change the way a government agency works. In Asia, Latin America, and the US, I worked as a consultant to governments where we've done that. But many governments in this area are instead focused on tenure. Many governments still have their own pension system. And so the idea is if you can just make it to a certain number of years, you get a pension. And the way you make it to a certain number of years is you either keep your head down and you don't get involved in anything controversial or innovative, or you do whatever the CEO, meaning the mayor or county administrator, whatever, tells you to do. And what we really should do is make sure that we're customer facing. An example is that my office number at the city rings into my city cell phone. I answer all my own constituent calls and all my own constituent emails because I want to stay in touch with what people are thinking. And sometimes I get really mean calls with people saying, curse words, why haven't you fixed this blank, blank, blank pothole? I pay $50,000 a year in taxes. Why are you not fixing my potholes? Well, the interesting thing is that City Council has no control over that. The mayor controls it.
Right.
But I'll call them back. And the first thing most people do is they apologize for leaving the curse words. And they say, I'm surprised you called me back personally. I say, yeah, that's what I do. And then we try to get their situation fixed.
Customer satisfaction. You mentioned that. And immediately my brain's going ding, 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 ding. So as a marketer, as a fellow marketer, right? Like what's the first thing that we talk about in our profession? It's who's your target audience? Why does that matter? Because a company cannot serve everyone, right? You can't please everyone. You can't be trying to sell your pen to every single person, right? Your widget. You have a very specific target audience that you are focused on, and everything you do circles around trying to appeal to that target audience, to meet that target audience's needs, and to appeal to them, to strike emotionally with them. And right. So that's that I think is the crux of our profession, right? Like getting into that target audience and pleasing them, because you cannot please everybody. I think government is different because you are, in fact, trying to please everybody. And I think that's probably one of those things that makes it really difficult.
Yeah. And one of the questions is, do you just please voters? We have a low turnout. So if the turnout for voting is 20 or 30%, do you only try to please those folks, or do you try to please everybody who pays taxes? And what about poor people who pay little or no taxes? Do you pay attention to them? And so, really the definition of government is supposed to fill or provide services in areas where the private sector fails. And It's about fixing market failures. And if we're getting into those areas, then we have to look at, what's the most efficient way we can solve this problem? What's the way that we can provide the best satisfaction to the community? But more importantly, is there a way that we can do it that will drive the economy forward, that will help people earn more money, that will help small businesses to grow? And so that, I think that's the way we have to look at it. A lot of times government uses internal measures, instead of checking to see if the customers are happy, they'll look at how many units you delivered, or how fast you delivered something, or how inexpensively you delivered it. Sometimes people would be willing to pay slightly more for a better service. And we have to be mindful of that. Before I got on council, I used to do a lot of public engagement and public involvement. And so I literally was the person standing in the front of the room dealing with an angry public, hundreds of people who were mad about whatever it was. And and my job was to try to build consensus into the community to try to solve a problem. We have big issues in our community, in our region, our state. And so how do you resolve them? And nobody wants something dirty or big in their yard, or in their backyard. So how do you resolve the issue in the best way possible? And I think that where government gets into trouble, and sometimes the private sector, is where they ignore what the public wants. One time I was working with an agency that had 5 blue dots where they wanted to put a facility, and I was standing next to a person who lived in that area, and he told the person from the organization, "My house is under that blue dot. If you put it there, you're going to tear down my house. I don't want you to tear down my house." And that's something that using the satellite maps, the government agency did not see that there was a house underneath the trees. And it's a great example of how we need to listen. And the other thing is, in terms of communication, there's a government communication, there's company communication, and then there's political communication. And technically, it's illegal to use government resources for politics. But what we find is that a lot of times communication departments or communication people get involved in politics, and that they're trying to prop up one or more elected officials. And when you do that, you're presenting information. It's asymmetric. You're sending information one way. And maybe the response that you want is kudos, saying, "Oh, congratulations, you're such a great person." But really what you should be doing instead is having a two-way communication. You should be having a dialogue with the public to find out what they want and what they need. And if the city of Tampa had done that in the last administration, for example, they would know that we need to fill potholes. We need to fix roads. But it was not set as a priority. And now we're $2 billion behind on fixing our roads.
Yeah. I have a client that's been dealing with flooding issues for quite some time, because of all of the rapid construction that's been going on in Tampa. The I don't know what's called I'm thinking of the word in Spanish, acueducto. I guess the aqueduct system, like the sewage system, can't keep up, right, with all of the rainwater. And that's there's just many, many problems when a city grows rapidly, as it has in the last few years. When I first came to Tampa in 2000, downtown Tampa was nothing. Like, it was a ghost town. And, I think Pam Iorio was the mayor at the time, and they did too good of a job at making Tampa such a great city. And there's just been so much rapid development that I think the city is having trouble keeping up. It just feels like anybody can just knock down a building and build whatever they want.
Well,
And
there's state law and there's local law about what you can build where. And there's also rules about maintaining stormwater on your property. For individual homes, usually the entitlements that are already there. And once an entitlement is given, government cannot take it away. That's a basic tenet of the United States too, is property rights. And so once you have entitlement, if it allows you to build a 2 or 3 story building and there's only 1 story building there, then you're entitled to build that with certain setbacks and stormwater retention and things like that. People get upset because folks come in and build, but those decisions were made decades ago for the most part. And it's true in many of the cases. Right now, the Planning Commission, City County Planning Commission, is going through a comprehensive plan update, and they're taking public input on that. And we've gone back and forth. What we find in South Tampa, especially, is that folks are saying, we've had more than our fair share of growth. We've had more growth than all the rest of the city combined, and it's enough. Also, South Tampa is mostly in a A flood zone, and it's difficult to get out because it's a peninsula, and also the people from St. Pete, Southern Pinellas are coming through our streets. So the folks in South Tampa are saying enough is enough. There are urbanists who want us to build more density in South Tampa. In theory, that's great, but you have to have the transportation infrastructure to get people out of here, especially in storms. There were 5 or 6 mayors that started developing downtown. My awareness started during the Martinez administration, and they built up Harbor Island, and then Sandy Freeman built up the aquarium. And I'm not picking all the projects, just picking some samples. Dick Greco, Martinez also built the convention center. Greco built the hotel next to the convention center. I think started the arena. And then Pam started the Riverwalk. Bill Poe was the originator of the idea, but Pam was the one that really started going and built Curtis Hickson Park. And also Channel District. And then in the last administration, Water Street came up, and Water Street's great, but the challenge is that there were major subsidies given to some of these real estate projects, and the past is in the past, but I think it's unfair to give one developer a subsidy and not another one. The one project downtown got $100 million subsidy from the last administration. By the way, $100 million is 25 times what they were spending on road repair. So imagine what we could have done with road repair.
Wow.
Then Midtown over on Dale Mabry got zero. And initially anyway, there were similar investments. So why is it fair to invest in one, subsidize one, and not the other? And the money is going for infrastructure, but other developers are paying their own infrastructure. So why should the public do that? And why should the public pay more taxes to invest in real estate?
So I have a question. I'm so sorry if it's out of left field or if you don't know, but you seem to know a lot about the history and everything of how everything developed. Driving down North Boulevard, once I pass Julian B. Lane Park, I always point to the left and go, "Oh my God, that used to be the projects. I used to volunteer there reading. I used to go there to the Head Start school inside of the projects that was right across from Blake High School and read to kids in the projects as a volunteer thing when I worked way back when at Clear Channel." And all of that has been knocked down, and I can't help but wonder, like where did these people get displaced to? Like, what, you know what I mean? Like when their housing got demolished, because that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing Tampa is just being overtaken by all these like high-end developments. It seems like the cost of living here has gotten higher and higher. And I feel like the whole city, like a lot of people are getting displaced, and it's getting harder. You have to pay a higher price tag to be able to say I live in Tampa. And like, do you have any insights on that? On how so is city just going to become a place for rich people, or is there going to still be diversity
Well,
in town?
the last mayor, last administration had what I call a visual vision for Tampa. And that is their goal was to take out anything that looked old, dirty, or poor and get rid of it. And the African-American community calls that gentrification. The housing projects you were talking about were in terrible condition. They were old. They were part of a 1960s strategy, which is where you have concentrations of poverty. We know that that's not a good idea anymore. But what most cities are doing...
Why is that not a good idea anymore?
Because
to have that diversity, right? Like of the, poor and rich or whatever.
Segregation was terrible, but during segregation, you had poor people, middle-class people, upper-class people all living in the same neighborhood. And so they could all work with each other, help each other, help entrepreneurs get started. And then after the housing rights laws were passed, upper-class and middle-class people left. And so you end up with concentrations of poverty.
Mm.
And so one strategy is to go through and literally plow that down, which is what the last administration did, and not leave any place for poor people. The other strategy is to go in and help people to rise up and meet their full potential. Another strategy is just to go subsidize. I prefer to help people buy their own homes and build their own businesses, because that's the American dream that helps people build intergenerational wealth. But going back to this project that you mentioned, there were something like 1,200 families there. And usually what cities do is they'll build 1,200 new affordable homes somewhere else, and then they'll move them. What the last administration did is they sold the land to a big developer, tore down the homes, And here it is like 10 years later, and there's almost no affordable housing for those folks to move into. And they're going to replace them with something like 400 units. Some of them they call affordable, but they're at higher rates, not really accessible by poor people.
Hmm.
And so what happened is the poor people left and went into the county or farther out. Well, that creates education problems, transportation problems. Now, imagine if you're a business and you're trying to get your potential employees to work. If they have to take a bus 2 hours from Brandon or further east, imagine what that does to their
Yeah.
reliability in your business, and it
Yeah.
raises costs and expectations.
Right.
And I don't think that was a smart thing to do. And it just happens that the former mayor became a lobbyist, and that company he sold the property to is now his client. And I don't think that that's right. I don't think that's the way government should be run.
It goes back to relationships,
Yeah.
relationships, relationships, relationships.
And what we
It's
should do
crazy.
is partner through the CRA. What we're doing is we're partnering with small nonprofits and developers instead of building 2,000 units in one place. We're trying to build duplexes and triplexes and quads and others to
Yeah.
spread everything out. And when we do more than a few units, we're trying to make it a mix of mixed income so that folks of all different incomes can live together.
Yeah.
I think we shouldn't stigmatize and stereotype poverty. Most families in the United States started in poverty because most of us started with immigrant families
Hmm.
and they built themselves up. And what we need to do is continue to provide the opportunities for people to live the American dream.
Yep, like you said, that is the American dream. I mean, I'm certainly no poster child for that, but um, my daughter just learned how to ride her bike without training wheels. Huge accomplishment. And in me talking to her about the bike and getting her to love a bike, I told her when I first came from Puerto Rico and I was a student at USF, my first form of transportation was a bike. And she's like, "You didn't have a car?" I'm like, "No, I couldn't afford a car." So I bought a bike, and that is what I used to get to work. Now, granted, it was all on campus. Again, nothing like there's no sad story here. It's all very like normal college student stuff. But yeah, I would ride my bike to work, and that was my form of transportation until I used the bike to make enough money to save up for a used car, and then I transitioned to my first cheap used car. But you're right. I mean, those opportunities need to be there, and I think hearing you speak, there needs to be, I think, a tremendous amount of control on the government to make sure that these private developers are not, going crazy because they're in it for the money. They want to invest some money and make more money. So they take this plot of land and they want to build, a 2, 3, 4, 5, 20-story thing that's going to generate a lot of money. But then that's also going to stress the infrastructure of the city. It's going to affect the diversity of the kinds of people, right? Because a developer's not going to come in and say, "I'm going to do affordable housing and sell it for a very low profit margin." They're going to try to sell it for as much as they can. And I think that that's part of the problem, that these private people are coming in trying to just make money. And I feel like the city needs to have a really good oversight in terms of managing all of these complex, like you said, there's consequences to displacing poor people. There's consequences to, putting now 20 toilets on top of what used to be one toilet.
So, the yes, private sector wants to make money, but there are a lot of enlightened private sector developers who are willing to build affordable housing. The thing is that they have to find a way to make that back because private sector is not in business to lose money. So sometimes they can build market rate housing with affordable housing, and the market rate can offset the other. There are also federal, state, and local grants that they can take in. What I believe is that we should focus on smaller projects instead of huge projects. Instead of counting the number of houses that we're in, what we should do is try to create a sense of community where there are pockets of poverty. And the most important thing is, how do we get people out of poverty? That right now there are about 50,000 families that are looking for affordable housing. If the city or government subsidized each one with 100,000, that would be $5 billion, which is 2.5 times the city budget. The city, there's no way that the city can help everybody who wants to find a house find one. Instead, what we can do is help. Right now, there are 2,000 families that have gone through a HUD-approved training program to buy a house, and there's not enough inventory. So we need to work with the private sector to get more inventory that's of a cost that they can afford, and give them a helping hand to buy their home. Once they buy their home, then you've got an intergenerational wealth creation. It could be that 2 or 3 generations of the family will stay there, or because of the appreciation of the asset, they'll have money invested in it. And then you don't have an ongoing subsidy. You have maybe a one-time small subsidy, and then you create intergenerational wealth and you get people and families out of poverty. The other thing is investing in the education system. Last week at Cafe Con Tampa, I had the principal of Tampa Bay Tech, and that's a vocational school where they teach things like architecture and graphic design and others. And what's interesting is there's a whole generation of entrepreneurs that have popped up out of Tampa Bay Tech, because Tampa Bay Tech teaches people to take initiative. They give them confidence to be able to build on their own, and they teach them skills that they learn before the kids in college learn. And what's happening is that it's giving people in East Tampa in particular the confidence to start their own businesses. And there's so many successful businesses that come out. And this is a school where the buildings are not that great. There are 73% people on free and reduced lunches. 62 students are homeless. 2 faculty members are homeless.
Wow.
And imagine if we just did a little bit to get them better equipment, to get them the latest editions of the software or better computers or whatever. Imagine the intergenerational wealth we'll create, because the most jobs in the United States are in small businesses, not big companies. It doesn't matter how many thousands of jobs we subsidize from another place. It matters how we help people create wealth and create businesses. There's an entrepreneur I met in East Tampa who started a janitorial company, and she provides janitorial services for people. And she was somehow so good at marketing that she didn't have too much business. So now she started a referral service where she's referring business to other janitorial companies. I just thought that was brilliant.
That's
You
amazing.
you see the innovation. When you give people a chance and you motivate and inspire them, they innovate. And what we
Yes,
need is more innovation in our community.
I agree. 100%. 100%. I have a question. So, you and I are pretty similar in that, we're marketing and PR professionals. What on God's green earth made you step over into government?
I was I was volunteering for my neighborhood association in Hyde Park, and I saw that the government at the time was crushing neighborhoods. They were removing all the resources into downtown and ignoring the infrastructure in neighborhoods. The flooding problems, the road problems, and others, parks. The parks are, everybody thinks in Tampa that only their roads are falling apart, only their parks are falling apart, but it's all over the city. And that's because we hit the Great Recession. Great Recession ended in 2009, by the way. And then the next administration came in and decided to subsidize developers. And the neighborhoods felt shortchanged. And that's why we have the horrible backlog of infrastructure issues right now. So I ran because the neighborhoods asked me to run to try to bring some equity to the situation. You think about economic development used to be that you would subsidize companies from out of state to come in, or with the last administration, you subsidize real estate development. Well, real estate is the old engine of economic development for Florida, but it's not the engine of the future. We need to work on the technologies and industries of the future. And real estate is important, but I think we should focus on the people and companies that are going to lease and buy the space. And what I tell developers is, let's work on your clients and your customers, not the buildings themselves. Because is it really fair to subsidize your competitors? And we need to invest in the neighborhood. So I ran to try to do that. In modern economic development, what's happening is people are running businesses out of their homes, and some people are working remotely all over the world from their homes, and they're bringing money into this area. The economic engine is around neighborhoods. It's not in the big office environments anymore. By the way, when I started 7 years ago, the economic development group in Tampa was still, with the last administration, was still subsidizing companies from out of state. And I asked them how many of these companies met their goals. If they promised 200 jobs and $20 million in investment, how many of them met their goals? And they said, we don't know. And I said, why not? And they said, well, they're private companies. They don't have to tell us. And I said, well, why don't you require them to tell you? And they said, well, they're private companies. I said, but we're giving them taxpayer money. Why are we doing that? And so long story short is I did some research. And one of the things we did is we looked at LinkedIn. The other thing we did is we called their offices. If you call a receptionist and say, how many employees do you have? They'll tell you most of the time. And if they said they had 200 jobs and they only have 5, that means they didn't come close to hitting their goals. Well, I found that almost none of them had come close to hitting their goals. And 2 of them were out of business. 3 of them were out of business. And one of those was in jail. And why are we subsidizing companies like this? This is wasting taxpayer money. It's money that could have been used to fix roads and fix parks and fix flooding. And so I passed an ordinance, my colleagues supported, which says that if a company gets subsidy from the city, the CEO every year has to sign a sworn affidavit saying whether or not they hit the goals. Well, in the last 6 years, guess how many subsidies they've asked for? 0. Because they know they can't hit the goals. In fact, the Economic Development Group has changed their measures of success. They don't even measure jobs anymore because they know they can't hit the goals. And it's a dumb way of doing economic development. It's the 80s way. The modern way is that we help small businesses to grow and we create innovation. If you think about the biggest companies in the region, like Public, Sykes, Tech Data, Jabil, all these big companies, by the way, most of them are not in Tampa, but these are big companies that started as small companies. Even Sykes was relatively small when they moved to Tampa. They didn't move to Tampa because of any economic development group or incentives. They moved here because John Sykes and his wife walked around Tampa when we didn't really have a downtown, and they just loved the city and they moved here. And some of the others, the same thing. But the biggest companies in the region are all companies that either came in when they were small or they grew as small businesses. Raymond James, another one. And that's how we build great wealth, is we build up companies and then many of them sell, like Sykes sold, and you create a bunch of millionaires. And then guess what? Those millionaires go and they invest in the next generation. They invest in the next generation.
Yeah.
And if you think about Hewlett and Packard in Silicon Valley, like in the 50s, call them Generation 1 in Silicon Valley. Now they're probably on generation 16 or 20. I think we're at the 3rd or 4th generation in Tampa. And so we're moving fast. The tech sector is growing. The money, the private equity is growing. And we have the chance to really ramp that up. But what we need to do is look at all the diversity of ideas that are out there, and considering what AI is doing to change the workforce and competitive environment, we need to figure out, what are the jobs of the future. I think, for example, the janitorial company, she probably will have a going company for a long time until robots can take that over.
I think, and I think, so the internet lowered the barrier of entry to many industries. And I think AI, 2 years from now, we're going to look back. I mean, AI is advancing so quickly, and it is giving us so many shortcuts from idea to reality. It shortens the timeline. So I think that if properly managed, this vision for the future that you mentioned, which I totally agree with, that's one of the reasons why I am in love with business. I love business, the concept of starting a business, the concept of entrepreneurship, which is why I have the show, because I think that if you can start a company, you can provide jobs to people, you can provide purpose and mission to people. When you look at mental health, and that, which we have a huge mental health crisis in this country, you speak to any psychiatrist or psychologist, they will tell you that having a purpose, feeling like your life has purpose, is one of the biggest things that influences your satisfaction and your feelings of well-being in life. So a business can provide financial stability, purpose, all of these things to a bunch of other people, like you said, and these micro, if we develop these young and up and coming entrepreneurs, and the world is going to be very different. You're right.
I love hearing entrepreneurial ideas. One of my clients in the past was John West at System One, and he and his wife were working at Marathon Oil in Ohio. They cashed in their 401k for like $100,000, and they moved here, and they saw an opportunity because in the 90s, cell phone companies were building cell phone towers. And what you need to be able to build a cell phone tower is engineers and technical workers. And all the temp companies until that time were mostly lawyers and accountants and other kind of back office operations. But he set up a company that provided those engineers and technical people. And he also could provide them in bulk at a bulk rate. And if I remember correctly, 10 years later, he He started with 100,000 investment. 10 years later, he sold to monster.com for 100 million. And
Wow.
since then, he's been investing in other companies. And the companies he invested in, some of them cashed out and the people invested again. There's a guy named, I think it's Jim McDougall in St. Pete. Back in the 90s, he was and I'm using old stories because we can talk about them now, but he was I think an insurance salesman or a benefits provider. And a new law came through called COBRA, which said that if an employee leaves, you have to offer them healthcare insurance. But
Hmm.
there was a big liability because if you couldn't prove that you had offered it to them with certified mail and other processes, you could get fined. And one company got fined $100 million. So he started a company that just focused on providing that mail service for Cobra. And I don't remember exactly. I think he sold it for like 150 million or something like that. And there are just these brilliant ideas that people come up with where they find very narrow gaps. And that's why we need the private sector to flourish. And we need to provide an environment where we encourage people to set up their own businesses. And to some extent, government gets out of their way to make sure that they can be successful. Because I think on their own, people will find ideas. And it doesn't matter what the education level is or how
Hmm.
much capital they start with. People will just find ideas. The great thing about the American culture and system and the education system versus some of them around the world is that we teach people to think creatively. To some extent, we teach them to be deviants. And deviant meaning in a positive way. So you get people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates who think differently than other people. And the more we can do that, I think the more we can think ahead of AI and continue to come up with ideas that step ahead of AI or step outside of its ability.
Yep. Agreed. And you're a huge proponent of the arts. Last time we met, you asked me about my artwork. I actually have one here. I don't know if
Oh,
I have the
cool.
little blur
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, it's I
Right.
kind of want to keep working on it, but this was the most recent thing. I took a break from painting. So if I do like painting. It's not like breathing. I know some people where, painting or doing art is like breathing to them and they can't stop. But my love of art is what made me choose my profession. I love business and I love art. So advertising, duh, it's perfect. But I know you're a huge proponent of the arts. We're talking about entrepreneurship and coming up with novel ideas and making money and whatnot. Do you think that there's a future for artists to actually make money, especially with AI?
Yeah, I think there always will be an opportunity for artists to make money by thinking differently and creating original art. The art market is evolving with AI and digital art right now. What you may remember, I lived in Singapore 5 years, sponsored at first by the Rotary clubs in this area. And in Singapore, they hired my company I was working with there. Singapore government hired them to look at how do we create branded products and how do we move up the economic food chain? Because Singapore was a manufacturing base, but not a creative base. And what we realized is there was an intersection between the arts and creativity or innovation in the private sector. And so my old firm worked really hard to create or promote the creative sector. So I came back here in '94, and my company Tucker Hall had just started working with the city of St. Pete on promoting downtown. Downtown was empty then, but they had the Dali Museum and Treasure of the Czars exhibit, and they had a baseball stadium that didn't have a baseball team. And so they're trying to figure out how do we turn that around. And what we saw quickly was that what was flourishing in downtown St. Pete was the arts. And so we came up with a multi-tiered strategy to get the city to make the arts part of its DNA. And we added to it. We didn't create it, but we've been supportive of it and worked with it over the years. '96, we got a full page story in the New York Times that said no longer God's waiting room, talked about the arts. We had stories all over the world that talked about the arts. A few years later, I was one of the co-founders of the EDC in St. Pete. And in interviewing tech people, what we realized is that the reason why the tech companies located in St. Pete is because of the arts, because they want to operate in a creative environment. Their best employees want to operate in a creative environment. And I probably told you this before, but I've interviewed hundreds of CEOs of tech companies. And you think about what the best major is for a coder. A few years ago, the legislature tried to make every kid study coding instead of Spanish and French. And if they had done that, all those kids would be out of work because basic coding is being done by AI now.
Hmm.
But the best coders, these CEOs say, all studied music. And the reason is that they say it's easier to teach a musician about coding than it is to teach a coder about harmonies. And software has to work with other softwares. Well, if you're at heart your passion is music, but you're working as a coder in a tech company, what you're going to want to do on all your free time is jam with your buddies and play music. And you want to go see the orchestra, you want to go see other bands, but you actually want to jam. So if there's not a music scene, if there's not an art scene, they're not going to be located in the city.
Right.
Some of these tech companies will invite a person to downtown St. Pete on a Friday, put them in a hotel, and then they'll interview them on Monday. And by Monday, St. Pete sells itself. And so what I've done with my colleagues over the last few years in Tampa is we've reinvested in the arts. Downtown Tampa had a lot of buildings, but it didn't really have soul. It wasn't activated. And people from St. Pete and other cities would say, hey, you got beautiful buildings, but there's not that much going on. We've invested through the CRA, my colleagues and I have invested 25 cents on the dollar for most of the arts groups downtown. Now there's hundreds of millions of private sector investment going on the arts in downtown Tampa. I also worked with Daryl Shaw to build up the arts in Ybor City as a center for innovation there. And it's going to really take off. It's going to be part of the innovation entrepreneurship future of Tampa.
I was leaving the Tampa Firefighter Museum. It was a field trip for my daughter. And I saw a building that had 3 prominent artists. Was that, do you know which one I'm talking about? Was that you guys? I think it had, I'm so sorry if I'm getting this wrong. I think it was Jimi Hendrix. The other one was
Oh yeah.
Freddie Mercury. And I can't remember the third artist. Was that?
That's a building it's part of the Encore project. It's a project that is owned by the Tampa Housing Authority
Mhm.
and in partnership with Bank of America and other partners over the years. So they've added public art. The park next to that, Perry Harvey Park, the
Mhm.
city invested in.
And I saw art there in the park too. There's like some statues of a family. I don't remember what it was, but it gave
Yes,
me an
people.
opportunity to talk to my daughter about the artist. It gave me an opportunity to tell my daughter, "Oh, look at that." So it definitely enriches your life, and I see Freddie, I'm a big fan. I see Freddie Mercury and I'm like, "Oh, let me play the song so you can hear it." I think I played for her like Pink Floyd, like the teacher, Leave Them Kids Alone. I forget the name of that song, but I was like, I don't know if I'm doing my daughter a service or disservice by playing the song for her, but trying to make sure that she's cultured and knows about it,
Yeah.
and it definitely enriches our lives. How has your PR background and marketing PR? Because I heard you like put that whole plan together, and I was like, yeah, that's what we do. We look at this problem, we look at a problem, and we think through like what are the tactics that we're going to implement that in concert are going to accomplish our end objective. So how I imagine it has helped, but how has it helped in your role in government, which is definitely, it sounds to me, a lot more complex than running an organization or helping a private business?
Well, the interesting thing about the position I'm in is that city council, I'm one of 7 on city council. And in theory, there are 2 branches of government. We're equal to the mayor, but the mayor is the administrator of the city. So the mayor, like I was saying earlier, if somebody needs a pothole fixed, city council members cannot do that. All we can do is ask the staff or plead with them to ask them to do, but ultimately the mayor has to approve it. City council approves the budget and other things, but that's interesting. But my experience pushes me to want to provide authentic communication. If you look at my social media, you don't see me bragging and posting a lot of stuff. I was at an event last night. I didn't post anything about it, but the people there took pictures of me and posted it because I think that's a more authentic way of doing it. There's all different levels of communication, but we know that the best form of communication is word of mouth. and if I show up at an event, I want to make sure that the people at the event know that I'm there to listen to them. I'm not there to take a selfie and post on Facebook. They can see the difference. And the other thing is that's frustrating for me is that this administration, the last administration, focused communication around branding the mayor because they're trying to help make sure the mayors have a legacy and maybe they could go on and do other things in the future. And and I think that communication should be around how we help the public, not about what government wants.
I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you. What would you say is your favorite book that has influenced you the most?
There are a lot of them. When I was in Singapore, Singapore, I think, was a particularly well-run country. It doesn't have all the same freedoms we have, and I object to that. But they had an honest, hardworking, visionary leader, Lee Kuan Yew, who built up the country, and he's written a whole series of books on how he looked at the resources of the country and built their economic development. And the core of it was that Singapore in 1965 had no water, no food, no natural resource at all. The only natural resource it had was its people. And I think the lesson there is that for 30 years, they've been the most competitive economy in the world because they focused on their people. And so what we need to do as a community, as a country, is make sure we focus on people, because people are our best asset. And as the examples we gave earlier, people will innovate. They'll figure out ways around problems and create wealth in our community.
Cool. And then your favorite place to travel?
When I lived in Asia, I had a chance to go to Bali a lot in Indonesia, and it's really crowded now, but it's still a beautiful place. If you go to Bali, go up in the mountains. Don't go to the beaches. If you want to go to the beach, go to the Caribbean. If you want to go to a beautiful place that has an original culture, go up in the mountains, get away from the cities, and enjoy the culture in Bali. It's a really magical place.
What's the essence of their culture, would you say?
Most of Indonesia, they have like 15, 16,000 islands, and most of the country is Muslim. It's the largest Muslim country in the world, but they have pockets of Christianity and other religions. But in Bali, there were Hindu traders from India that went through there. And so their religion is a combination of their Balinese mysticism with Hindu culture. And so every house has a temple next to it, and the temples are usually bigger than or more ornate than the houses. And every morning they take out flowers as offerings. And so you see people in authentic native clothes putting out fresh flowers, so the place smells like flowers. And then at night, at sundown, they take flowers and fruit as offerings to the altars. And so you see these beautiful, colorful activities going on. Plus you have lush mountains and waterfalls and rivers and all kinds of great things. Rice terraces, beautiful place.
This has been lovely, Bill. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me and sharing all these insights on how government and the corporate world kind of blend and differ. It's certainly wonderful to have you as part of our city council and really fighting the good fight for some of the things that you see are not right. So thank you for sharing all your insight.
Thank you for inviting me, and congratulations on all your success. We didn't talk for a few years, and it's great to see you at the beginning and see where you are now and all that you've accomplished. And I'm so happy for you and all your success. So congratulations and thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.